This is Dr. Fox. Thank you all for your continued support for CRPN and CRPN Central. For more information about our mission, please contact us today at info@crpainnet.com for details.
What is wrong with you, Sight? We have given you everything and shelled out loads of cash to run this trial. And yet, your enrollment is terrible. Your data entry is behind. You have month-old unanswered queries. And now, we are hearing you won't even allow our monitors access to data. Don't expect us to bring you another trial. You're terrible.
Oh, terrible, huh? Well, at least the feeling is mutual. How's the startup payment coming after a year of waiting? You bait and switched the protocol 2 months in to almost double the cost of the trial without a negotiated adjustment. You dropped study arms that were dependent on the budget analysis, and your EDC and technology just cost us months of person power in training and onboarding that you refused to pay for. Trust us, we will be just as happy to end this arrangement as you.
Blah, 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 blah. All we hear is a whiny little expendable side that can be replaced. Nothing is our fault. We pay the CRO to handle those problems. And it's not our job to play referee between the two of you. Figure it out. Get your act together and get back to work.
Wow. Okay then, we are done here, and we won't be treated like that from a hands-off sponsor who can't manage their CROs, much less their legal obligations to their sites. Let's wrap this up. We'll continue to serve the patients we've committed to. Afterward, you can find a new site to abuse.
1 week later.
I have to hand it to you, Sight. You've absolutely knocked this enrollment out of the park. The EDC is spotless. Monitoring reports are phenomenal, and we can't believe the quality that you've put into this trial. On behalf of the sponsor and all the patients we are helping together, thank you. By the way, we just got an approval for a study extension, and we'd really like to have you join the team.
It means a lot to hear that, and thank you for your kind words, sponsor. You've always been a dependable colleague. You've ensured we've had what we needed from the CROs every step of the way, and you've always offered direct and rapid communication to help us navigate the trial's challenges. We wish more sponsors were like you. Unfortunately, this professional experience is a rare one in our industry.
We actively work with our sites as partners, and we want to be your sponsor of choice. If there's anything you need to succeed, please do not hesitate to call us. If the CROs don't come through, let us know ASAP, and we will take care of it. After all, we are just as responsible, if not more, to ensure you have what you need as the CROs we hire.
You are by far one of the best sponsors we have ever collaborated with, and we really appreciate the relationship you've built with us. We'd love to be part of your extension, and we'll give you the same quality services to all of your upcoming trials if you'd like to continue working with us.
Professional relationships are similar to a garden sometimes. What you grow is not only what you plant, but also what you water. If you plant, water, and encourage negative relationships, you end up with expensive, non-productive, and wasted short-term efforts that only yield future, fast-ending relationships. If you nurture positive relationships, you experience fulfilling and respected experiences that are far better results not only in the present, but also as a foundation that bears fruitful relationships for countless seasons. Sites. If your relationships with sponsors stops at the $sign, then it may be as shallow as the foundation you are building. Treat sponsors with the respect that they deserve and the respect that they give you. Understand that for the right sponsor, your hard efforts will be recognized and appreciated. Nurture that relationship, and be sure not to let the negative weeds take over your site's relationship garden. Sponsors. Money only goes so far. Sites are far more than expendable assets to your trial, and you'll find the sponsors who adopt this practice will be the victors of the trial race. If you continue to act unprofessionally like this, it won't be long until you run out of sites to abuse. Welcome to CRPN Central, the official podcast of the Clinical Research Payment Network. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Fox. CRPN Central discusses the real issues with our clinical research industry to explore and identify mutually beneficial solutions for all of our stakeholders. Relationships between clinical research sites and sponsors are often strained with frustration, misinterpretations, and at times absolute fallouts that cost our industry substantial amounts of time, money, and professional reputation. In the past few years, we have seen an increase in efforts from the industry's sponsors to address site relationships. How can we promote positive and professional relationships between clinical sites and sponsors to improve efficient collaborations and actively advance our research efforts in the industry? Today, we will investigate professional relationships and their dynamics between our industry's clinical sites and sponsors, defined as the comprehensive and normalized ways in which two or more professionals and/or their affiliated organizations behave toward each other as third-party administrators of clinical trial performance and companies, institutions, and organizations that own, oversee, pay, and maintain comprehensive clinical trial data and liability. First, we will speak with an experienced clinical site founder and owner about a site's industry relationship perspective. Then, we will speak with a sponsor representative to understand a sponsor's view of the industry's relationships. To maintain valid comparisons, both interviews will use the same questions, and my guests did not know the questions before the interview. We will reconvene after the interview to compare guest answers and perhaps identify ways that our industry can come together to foster successful and positive relationships throughout the course of a clinical trial. Our first guest is an experienced site founder, owner, and now leader of a successful national clinical site network. David LaHaie is the founder and president of Great Lakes Research Institute, which is now growing into a national organization, the Great Lakes Research Network, because of his team's continued commitment to success. For years now, David has custom crafted his site's capabilities specifically to the needs of his sponsors, with a particular focus on vaccine trials and their unique requirements. David's efforts demonstrate a strong commitment to building long-lasting and trusting relationships with sponsors, and I'm so very thankful that he has taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me, Mr. David LaHaie. Mr. David LaHaie, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Daniel. I'm really excited. I just feel honored. The people that you've had on your podcast have just been fantastic.
David, you're one of those fantastic people as well. Would you be willing to give us a brief introduction?
I'm going to just jump right in and give a plug to CRPN. We've actually used Daniel Fox within the Great Lakes Research Network, the breadth of the services that you've offered, Daniel. And honestly, it's absolutely phenomenal. And it really revolutionized what we do kind of within the finance group. I guess to go into more of what I do, I've been in research in a business development angle. I've mainly focused my time and energy within the academic medical center space. And then with COVID, I noticed that a lot of these academic medical centers were just kind of shutting off their research departments. And I kind of rationalized in my own head, I thought, how are we going to take our existing antiviral medications and get something that is a therapeutic to COVID? If you remember, there was all these scare with, the death rate is 10%, 15%, because couldn't have a whole lot of confirmed cases because there weren't tests available at the time. I decided I'm going to run right into that. I was currently working. I left my job. I started a clinical research site and focused on COVID-19 therapeutics. After that, I engulfed myself into the clinical research space and then decided to tackle another challenge of the industry, which is the lack of diversity, both in the investigator side as well as the patient's representation side. My focus, where my current position right now, the president of the Great Lakes Research Network, we're a site network that focuses specifically on that. We have 5 full-fledged clinical research sites and then a number of other outpost sites. We train physicians who have a diverse background that see patients that are just a pillar in their space, whether they're an urban physician or a rural physician, but they have the trust of their patient population. So we train them and then help them to become effective principal investigators. We get research studies and then we bring studies to underserved areas.
From the story that you just told, you were working, you were fine, but you saw a problem and you knew that it's something something that you really wanted to dedicate yourself to. So you stepped up, you built a network of research sites dedicated to solving a problem, not only for our industry, but also for our community. How's it going?
It's phenomenal. I mean, you wouldn't believe how much traction we've got. I think it's something that's dearly needed within the clinical research space. We've had phenomenal relationships with our sponsors. That really has made all the difference to us.
Today's episode is on exactly that, relationships, specifically how we as sites engage with our sponsors. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I've asked these questions to another interviewer already. And we're going to see how you respond versus how they respond. We're going to look for similarities, some differences, and maybe we can identify some potential solutions that could help both our sponsors and our sites become better at holding good professional relationships in the industry.
Let's do it.
How do you define professional relationships in clinical research?
Wow, just starting off with the with the really hard ones. Professional relationships are often glossed over as everybody is kind of a cog that you can just need to get X, Y, and Z from, and then you're done and you can carry on with your job. The approach that I take is that everybody that I do business with today, I will likely be doing business with them tomorrow or during another study. The importance of any individual is not limited to what their present value to you is. And so if you look at things with a long-term time horizon, knowing that this monitor that you're working with today is a CTM tomorrow, and that CTM is going to be a director or a VP later on down the road. I think when you look at it that way, and that's the power of a long-term time horizon. When you see kind of the dynamic of a professional world and you're not playing it for short term, you end up creating far more valuable relationships and your daily interactions are far more rewarding. You end up making a much stronger impression on the people that you're working with because you're not just getting to the bare minimum. You care about them as a person. You want to see not only that you provide what they need, but that you make their job easier and that you make them look good to their boss. And so those are things that I like to keep in mind to define a professional business relationship. One of our PIs in Detroit, the guy is absolutely a charisma machine. He'll talk with the monitors and then he'll schedule times to go visit with them later on. It's not about getting something done so I can get on with stuff that's important to me. It's about creating a relationship, delivering, over-delivering on what you need so that that person looks good, so that they feel confident working with you.
Do you think that the requirements for long-term relationships require different forms of resources to invest in them?
There is a lot of just standard business etiquette that is often lost within the industry. A lot of people come from the clinical space where you go into work every day and you run in and out of exam rooms, and you're not familiar with all of these other modes of communication that people from the sponsor end are more used to. They work from their office in front of a computer sending emails, and then they get on a plane. While they're on the plane, they've got their computer open and they're sending emails.
Yep.
And then they get to the site and then they got their computer open and they're sending emails. And a lot of people from our background, they're clinicians. They're used to going in and seeing people, and they might have a personal email address they check every few days. But being able to relate to and work with somebody on that same level, on the same level that they are. I work in business. I want to make sure that you can get your business done quickly. Being able to respond to emails, respond to phone calls quickly. If they have a deadline that they need to hit, the PI or the coordinator or someone isn't getting back to them, that's something that I would see as a serious problem.
How do you see the current state of site and sponsor relationships?
One item is just understanding it. If you're like, I'm kind of in a site, I'm struggling, the sponsor's not giving me what I need to be successful. In some respects, you need to understand that whoever you're talking to at the sponsor, they probably can't just wave a magic wand and fix that. I've worked for a lot of large companies. I had a couple of choices. I could just brute force my way into whatever I needed and then make a bunch of enemies, or I could just get along with everybody and get promoted. What do you think I did?
Exactly.
The people that you work with from the sponsor side, they want their interaction to go swimmingly with you. And generally having that empathy with where they happen to be is extremely important. There's kind of an interesting hierarchy with a lot of sites. Once you kind of figure out the business aspect and once you kind of take care of these items, sponsors love to work. They absolutely love to work with you. I don't know, this is maybe an idea for LaHaie Consulting, which is just helping train sites that maybe are more from that clinical background. And we may be doing things that aren't really reflecting us well in the sponsor's eyes. And that should be able to take them from kind of being the site underclass to becoming a more productive site that like sponsors absolutely love to work for.
Oh, yeah.
To the point where you're turning down requests for PSVs. If you take the standpoint of I'm empathetic to what the people that I'm working with are going through, they don't want to be the guard dog. They want to make sure that you're successful. When you're successful, they're successful, period. They don't want to deal with all of the extra drama. They've got hard enough lives on their own. If as a site, you can make things easy on them, they're going to want to work with you, and they will come back and continuously send you more and more opportunities.
And I've had the same thing. Of course, I've gone through my angry phases where I was very mean to people. Anyone who's been through my mean phases, I'm really sorry. It was a scared and frustrated site. Start treating people like human beings. You start being considerate about what they're going through. Like these poor budget analysts. I can only imagine how many sites they're trying to negotiate with right now, and how many budgets and Excel spreadsheets they have to navigate. And you have to understand, we're all here for a good reason. We just have to coordinate it.
One of my business partners in Detroit, Christopher Sommerfeld, said, if you didn't like the 28-year-old me, you're not alone. I don't like the 28-year-old me either. It's all about growing and becoming more mature and kind of correcting some of the things that held you back in the future.
Looking back, you say, I'm so sorry. That's actually an interesting thing about relationships. You have to foster it. You have to just learn from your mistakes and be better at building them. It does take a lot of work and experience to build positive relationships.
100%.
You've been at this for a while, right?
Time just flew by, so it doesn't feel like it. In one of the items that I regularly do, I'll go back into the inbox, and people that I've had a solid relationship with, I'll just kind of check in and see what they've been up to over the last 6 months, 8 months, year. I've had study opportunities come up to me that if you're actually interested in a person, LinkedIn is such a good tool. Somebody whom you worked at another company, let's say they get a promotion or change jobs, do something different, a simple message to them over LinkedIn, just to say something like, hey, I noticed now you're doing this. I always thought this was something that would be really good for you. I want to hear what you're up to right now. Would you have time next week to connect? Nobody turns you down. No. I generally like to not say things like nobody. There's probably
Some
one
people
person.
just want to be left alone. What do you feel encourages positive relationships between sites and sponsors?
That's a really good question. There's a phrase that we attract what we're ready for.
Interesting.
Your own mindset. If I've had a bad day and I just want to bark at something, then I'm not going to attract any positive interactions, or, I'm not going to have any sponsors that are interested in having a follow-up call. If you regularly have a grateful attitude, the top down from pharma is always, hey, look, we got to be site-centered. That's kind of what they try to imprint onto their staff members. Same thing from the top down in the site world. Got to have a certain amount of sponsor-centric attitude. Oftentimes, I've been in situations where I've had really unfortunate events happen with sponsors, and it allows you to really get upset. The first sponsor I've ever worked for, we did a significant amount of work for them, and they never paid.
Wow.
So getting over something like that, the fact that I had to essentially bankroll an entire trial for this sponsor, it's easy to get upset with things that are either caused by some type of poor organization or bureaucracy within another entity. If there's anything that I'm going to sound like a broken record, it's going to be this. With a long-term time horizon, you can't be thinking short-term, because if you're thinking short-term, you're only going to be focused on what is irritating you at the moment. But if you're like, okay, this isn't a relationship that is going to end as soon as I walk away or as soon as I hit send on the email. This is something that this person is going to be valuable for me, valuable to me, and I'm going to be valuable to them for the next decade or longer. If you take that type of attitude, you're that grateful for the business that you get, the fact that you can provide for your family because of the work you're doing for them, then it's natural that you're going to foster positive relationships with the people you do business for.
It sounds like you work very closely to foster long-term synergy with these relationships, where you're very interested in the needs of the people you work with, and as a result, it's almost like they reciprocate. You're interested in them and they're interested in you, and it's literally a very good and healthy professional relationship.
Absolutely. In fact, my site in Detroit, Great Lakes Research Institute, there was one specific sponsor because of the impact that they made within the coaching world. And my thought was like, how do I build their perfect site? That's the approach that I took. And so imagine if CRPN was like, hey, here's some vendor that I use. There's somebody who said, I'm going to build the perfect name your vendor for CRPN. What would you think? Would you want to do business with that person?
Someone who's literally building their world around the needs that I have.
Exactly.
My gosh, I'd be honored and humbled.
That's essentially the approach that I took. The needs of one sponsor is very similar to the needs of the other. It's not like you're discriminating discriminating against any sponsor by saying, hey, I'm building a site around this particular sponsor. But it does show something like, hey, I'm not short-sighted. This is a long-term. I'm going to continuously use this as the benchmark. It's high. The favorite site of this sponsor. And it's a couple of years later now. And, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and see that we've won multiple additional studies from that one sponsor. And there might be some times where there's like a hiccup or we don't like one budget item or something like that. In the long run, none of that stuff matters. It's just that we're both organizations and we both are mutually beneficial and we both appreciate the work that each of us does. In the long run, all of this stuff is water under the bridge.
What do you feel creates negative relationships between sites and sponsors?
That's another good question. One thing is the budget negotiation process is something that's particularly tricky.
Oh, yes.
This is just my 2 cents on it, and I'm not an expert the way you are, Dr. Fox. The challenge is that there are so many items that are costs to the site that are just not funded and cannot be funded on the budget. And so you've got to figure out ways to fund those items through asking more for certain items than would be essentially fair market value. And then the kickback you get always is, hey, this is beyond fair market value for these items, but you can't ask for some of the other items that are true costs. Yeah. I've done a number of studies where I've enrolled over 100 patients on those studies. And do you think my advertising costs were $3,000 for those 100 patients? $30 a patient? No. Of course not. There are certain things that they're not taken into account. And so those are really frustrating. So I really love what you're doing, Dr. Fox, with CRPN.
Well, thank you.
I think that having honest conversations about this is definitely how we're going to get some improvement.
In that frustration where sites are saying, we need more money to do this, it's costing more than what we're getting, and sponsors are saying, well, tough cookies, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
There's almost a level where the sites feel like the sponsors are not listening to their needs. They're not paying attention to what we need to help them succeed. If you were to do a root cause analysis, what do you think would be the reason for that frustration?
There's actually 2 things that we touched on already are really contributing. The first one is what we were describing about having empathy about the communication points. The person that you're talking to probably wants to help you, but they just don't have an avenue to do so. The other part is the legacy that built up a system that is flawed in certain ways, but if you're exceptionally good at navigating that system, then you can find yourself in a really positive situation. There's a lot of studies, for instance, that I'd have to turn down. Not that they're not important. They're really important studies. It's just they're so flawed in how the sponsor builds the study. If I really had a lot of money, I could just help this important research get completed by losing money on this because I believe in the cause. I'd have to say more than half of the studies I get are similar to that. I think a lot of the frustration comes from people on the site side. I don't think I've ever really met a site owner or a site director who's insincere about their reasons to be in this industry. We generally are people pleasers that want to make the world a better place. When they're sincerely trying to do really good work for a sponsor and then failing because the combination of the legacy that's built in to make these protocols and budgets dissonant or incomprehensible, if you lack that empathy, it kind of creates a lot of strife.
So let's say that we've got the situation where sites are very inflamed. They're feeling like sponsors are cheating them out of money, not paying them, expecting them to do free work. All of these big frustrations about being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have sponsors who feel like sites are just trying to milk them dry. They're cheating them out of money and they're taking all this money for free and not performing the work that they promised. And you've got these 2 big parties. Both have very legitimate concerns. How do you think we can improve the relationships between our sites and our sponsors?
One thing that's always worked for me is to be introspective and look inside yourself and think, what could I do better? Because the rising tide lifts all boats. The more successful you are at doing whatever it is you're doing, problems and challenges are just going to kind of fade away. Oftentimes, probably more often than not, our own problems are based on something that's inherent to us. And so that's kind of the approach that I take, this extreme sense of ownership of that. I'm going to remember who this quote is. He said that the rational man conforms himself to the world, whereas the irrational one demands the world conform to him. So I think there's room for both of them. If you want a good life and if you want to do well in the world, you conform yourself to the world. If you want to change the world, you got to be the irrational man. So I would prefer that I can be the rational man and you can be the irrational man and make the world conform to the way that would ultimately make it work better.
That reminds me of a quote that was given to me by one of my mentors as I was growing up. One of the lab managers when I was a postdoc. He literally started on 6 months salary of a promise and he just kept 6 months at a time getting grants.
Yeah.
And 30 years later, he was at this lab. And I'm this hyped up postdoc type A trying to control everything and the world is bad kind of a person. And he looked at me, he says, dude, chill out, man. The way I see it is you can only change so much of the world. You can only change so much of this little piece of the world. So focus on that, man. Make that little piece of the world the best possible little piece of the world you can control. And if we all do that, if we all just focus on our little piece and it looks great, combined, it's going to turn into a really, really nice thing.
He sounds like a great mentor.
Oh, he was. I learned so much from him. A lot of the wisdom I'm still working on. Some of the things that he used to do. I think it's interesting to be empathetic about those around you. You must first find peace within yourself and within what you do. And as you project that, people will acknowledge you. They'll want to be more like you. It's almost like they say kindness is infectious sometimes. Maybe if we were to try to treat each other with the respect that we would want, now we're going into a golden rule, it might allow us to really think about the well-being of each other and therefore the progression of the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent observation.
David, if I were to hand you the microphone and I said, what would you like to tell the industry about relationships and how we do them? What would you tell them?
We have the answers in front of us. If you want to advance your quality of life and your relationships, there's a book that was written 100 years ago by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you haven't read that, go read that right now. If you've read it before, go read it again. That's an exceptionally important work. It was written a long time ago, and those who really take heart to what was written in that book advance remarkably, and people want to work with them. That would move everything forward quite a bit, especially taking the empathy piece. That would make it easier for maybe mid-level management within pharma companies and scientific affairs people building out the budgets and other arenas, as well as people in government. The challenge with really making a change is that there's so many things that are interconnected that taking one piece out may make the entire thing like kind of collapse and fall apart. So you need this unanimous change. I mean, you're familiar with biology. It's odd that there are some genes that actually are far less evolutionary conservation than other genes. Actin and myosin, whether or not you're a planarium or a human being or a puppy or a plant, you have a very similar, like 99.99% of similarities of the beta-actin gene and the myosin gene. There's so many different things that interact with those, you can't really change a whole lot of them to make them. There has to be something transformational in order to really change the way that the industry works. But simply acknowledging it as an individual, acknowledging, hey, I'm not going to get my way all the time. I need to be happy whether I get my way or not. That's going to just make your life better and make everybody you work with lives better.
We all have actin and myosin. Let's just treat each other's actin and myosin with respect.
Exactly.
And move on and try to get some good research performed for future generations. We're in here for the long run. David, thank you for coming on to CRPN Central. Yeah. I love the interview and I look forward to sharing this with the audience.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Daniel. I really appreciate the time today.
All right. Bye.
Yep.
Our next guest operates as a relationship advocate at one of our industry's largest sponsor organizations. Dan Otap works as Principal Alliance and Partnerships Lead at Genentech and holds over a decade of industry experience in management, directorship, and leadership roles. His active and positive voice has earned the attention of our most prominent associations, and he has served as panelist and leader of numerous cross-industry roundtable discussions. It's an absolute honor to have Dan join our conversation today, and I'm thankful he has taken the time to share his experiences. Please welcome with me Mr. Dan Otap. Mr. Dan Otap, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Well, thank you for having me, my friend. I've been looking forward to this.
Would you be willing to give the audience a brief introduction?
Of course. I am presently a Principal Alliance and Partnerships Lead within Genentech's GRED business unit, which is a unit that's focused predominantly on early in human and first in human studies. So I deal with both oncology as well as non-oncology studies like the respiratory space, ophthalmology, etc. And my day job is really to try to advocate and make the entire process between sponsor, CRO, and sites as streamlined, as mutually beneficial as possible, trying to be a bridge in a way that is both dedicated to our specific alliance sites, but also be a bridge for all sites that work with us and create and think of inroads that would ultimately make the work that we all do more driven by efficiency, common sense, good good business practice, good relationship management. I'm also involved in the relationship and alliance management strategy of the Americas. And I am responsible, and I have a team of amazing people that work with me to kind of look at how we go about and engage relationship management for both Canada, the US, Central, and Latin America. I love what I do. And at the end of the day, it enables me to be in a space, hopefully and potentially, to have an opportunity of moving our industry forward in a fashion that, again, is beneficial to everybody and enjoyable. Because what we do is hard and what sites do is astronomical. I come from the site side. I have been in various roles, from entry-level data entry positions at Sloan Kettering in New York City to Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs and overseeing various different branches and functionalities of cancer centers at Columbia University. And the last site position I held was an Executive Director of Community Practice Research at City of Hope.
It's absolutely refreshing to hear your story and what you're trying to do. Sincerely, thank you very much for what you do for this industry. You provide hope to a lot of sites that need it right now.
Well, I appreciate that. And hopefully it's not a Sisyphusian effort. I do feel like we can move things forward. And I, for one, don't want to speak for companies, and I'm just speaking for myself on this podcast, but I know that I work for a company that is dedicated to this, and we have a long way to go, but we have leadership that are in tune with this kind of concept and this really high value weighting of relationship management as being a core of what we do. As opposed to having relationship that's transactional, we really do want to move towards the sites that we're partnering with being that partners.
Yeah.
And relationships take a lot of effort. We have to be considerate of one another. And that's the zeitgeist that I really want to hope to continue to usher in on this side of the fence.
Today's topic is relationships. We're going to ask a few questions. We're going to go through a journey about relationships. I'm going to ask these questions to another interviewee, and then we're going to compare the answers and we're going to see what the similarities are. We're going to see what the differences are and see what we can come up with.
All right. I'm buckled up, so let's hit it.
How do you define the expectation of professional relationships in clinical research?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's an inherent actual notion of putting the other before yourself. And that's something that I want to try to practice both in my personal life as well as professional life. Trying to keep in mind that at the end of the day, all of us are trying to do something that, to be quite honest, is both Herculean as well as honorable. We're trying to help sick people get better. Yes, there's some pessimists in the world that could say, well, no, Dan, it's about margin and really about how much you can do on return on investment. Cutting through all of that, at the end of the day, we work in a biotech pharma kind of industry where we're looking at new drug development. So hopefully we're trying to help sick people get better. If I keep that in mind, that means every engagement that I have, I'm going to be mindful of how can I put my best foot forward for the other side of the table here so that we can ultimately get to the same goal. It might sound cliche, but really having that mentality and using that standard and golden rule as far as an expectation is concerned puts one on a foundation that really is robustly capable of some really cool collaboration and beneficial long-standing partnerships.
I do believe in being a servant leader is what I call it.
I love that.
If you do everything you can to support and empower the people who are working with you, I'm not saying for you, with you.
Agreed.
Then you will not only succeed exponentially, you will also see that everyone wins. How do you see the current state of site and sponsor relationships?
So first, before we jump onto this topic, I really resonate and love how you actually identify yourself as a servant leader. I love that idea. So keep up the good work on that front. Anybody who attends conferences, there clearly is, let's just call it opportunity in that setting to make things better. I by no means am saying that everything wholeheartedly is broken. Otherwise, none of us would see drugs being developed and approved. So it is, to a degree, if you use pragmatic Occam's razor terms to define it, it's working. However, there to me remains a large opportunity to be quite frank on behalf of the sites, to be more cognizant. Our lives were turned upside down in 2021. Everything post-pandemic is different, including balancing one's books. The concept of inflation, the concept of needing by necessity to be more mindful of covering the bottom line as far as financial responsibility is even more critical at this point. We have to do better. We have to be more mindful and more open and aware, and we have to accommodate our site partnerships in a much better way. Something as simple as trying to be site-centric and leverage institutional knowledge that we have. I genuinely believe there are sponsors that have listened and heard and are empathetic to the current situations and are putting considerable efforts into trying to make positive change in that.
And in that description, you use the word site-centric. How would you define that?
Honestly, what I'm referencing is taking into account the priorities of that partner front and center and being mindful and trying to put yourself in their shoes. If we take that approach, that's being centered on that relationship, on the other entity, not saying this is my way, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and you don't have a say or stake in the discussion. Bringing in an empathetic mindset and business mentality is really truly being centric to the other individual. A site-centric model is one that takes as the highest priority, to the best of one's ability on the company side or sponsor side, putting the priorities of a site empathetically at the forefront of all the work that you try to go into.
That makes sense from like a sponsor or a CRO. If you wanted someone to do their very best work for you, it might be a good idea to consider the needs that they have or the resources that they need
Correct.
to do a good job.
You kind of are tapping on something that's very salient to all of us right now. There's a basic bottom line need of ensuring that things are compensated for accordingly and professionally, respectfully, carrying through that notion of truly having a collaborative business partnership and relationship. It's definitely something that's relevant to all of us right now.
Oh, yes. And I think that we're all starting to realize it. Given the established relationships and the expectations we have between sites and sponsors, what do you feel encourages positive relationships?
Absolutely, the concept of effective, professional, and relevant communication. There are some sites that I work with that I have a stronger relationship with than others. The most effective, most efficient, and actually most, to be honest, rewarding types of interactions that we have are with sites and individuals such as yourself in particular, that we have existing relationships with, that we know. It's kind of like a foxhole moment in a war. You know, you can go to that individual and say, hey, we're having a roadblock here, we're having a hiccup in the contract process, or there's something going on with the budget that seems to be out of whack a little bit. And you have communication lines that you know you kind of have your go-to people. Over time, you know, this individual is a very dedicated person to their work, and I know I can go to them and they're going to get it done. Or in the very least, put you in contact with people that will get it done for you. There are certain things that just seem to be common sense to me from business as well as a professional, as well as interpersonal dynamics. And it's not easy for every site. A site could come on here and say, well, thanks, Dan Otap. That's wonderful. But guess what? I can't even get my sponsor on the phone, let alone onto my email. I get that. So I don't want to sound so Pollyanna-ish or whatever the phrase would be in this discussion. All of the major advances that we've been able to do, at least in the clinical operations space of us executing trials faster, stronger, better, more efficiently, it's with these sites that are truly dedicated to communication and relationship.
It feels like oftentimes when there's like an escalation in a trial, the number one reason why it has escalated is that sites maybe feel ignored, or they feel like someone is not listening to them. Maybe like email chains or communications or something has happened. It's amazing what that attention between parties will do. If someone just knows that you're there, you haven't forgotten about them, and it's still in your attention, it's still on your radar, it creates the reasoning for additional patience.
Yeah.
I think communication has got to be one of the best parts. Likely two-way communication is the key, because one-way communication is not really an establishment of that connection. It's almost like a reputation that tends to be built between sites and sponsors, where, like you said, the foxhole situation where you have those go-to people, that's developed over time as you start to know people and you start to understand their strengths and their dedications and what they're doing. Almost like building your own brand, so to speak, as a professional.
Yeah.
As long as those professionals are developed to a point where you know that they're for the right reason, like you said, you strip it all away, we're here to help that patient. It doesn't take long to identify those people.
Yeah, agreed.
And then you kind of have your own little group, almost like an alliance of professionals who are coming together across all areas to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some brilliant minds right now in our space. It's called work for a reason. My wife tells me that when I'm having rough days. She's like, Dan, it's called work for a reason. But it's more than a paycheck. But what's really beautiful, honestly, within the past, I'd say maybe 5 years or so, there have become like a cadre of thought leaders in this space. And I think social media helps connect like minds. And that's something that, I mean, you're even seeing it with the work that you guys are doing with Save Our Sites as far as an initiative. They're like-minded individuals that genuinely want to make positive change. You build up kind of an alliance. You're building your professional network. I think you've mentioned it, or others have mentioned the mindset of having one's own tribe, knowing that, hey, I can call Dr. Fox and have a conversation conversation with this guy and know that I can, in confidence, talk through some pain points or really kind of just spitball on new concepts or ideas, and I'm going to get a straight shooting response and an insightful and impactful bit of feedback. That to me has been wonderful. It's built over the past 5 years or so. And now that I'm on the sponsor side, I didn't know if it was going to be different or better or worse. And I'm delightfully surprised that the momentum has continued. And now it's networking with both sponsors, CROs, and site relationships alike. It's truly one of the genuine pleasures of the work and the job that I do.
Do you think LinkedIn is the catalyst that caused this change?
In a way, yeah. I mean, far be it for me to know what the initial monetary or professional intent, other than uploading one's CV and then getting job opportunities. Whoever started to kind of leverage LinkedIn in a way that connected minds, or people started to post kind of akin to the other social media platforms in topics that are relevant to the industry that one works in. This has definitely been something that has benefited all of us and connected people. I mean, I've connected with folks that I would have never connected with before via that forum and via that platform. And it is a deliberate decision to do that, to engage in that type of interaction. Otherwise, you'd go through your standard network practices at conferences, etc. This has enabled an ability of having some meaningful connections, yourself included, or at least from my perspective. I'm all for it. And I think that it's been a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful tool to facilitate really good, in-depth discussions. And hopefully, I would imagine, some positive, concrete change in our industry, and I'm sure others.
Oh, yeah. At least 4 times per week, I will get a contact from someone who is either interested in the industry or someone who wants to have a site perspective with a technology development or something like that. To have those subject matter interviews, admittedly, you have to kind of throttle them a little bit or else they can take your entire week.
Yeah.
But it is very inspirational to know that people are listening and they're interested and they really want to know how to make things better. What do you feel creates the negative relationships that we're seeing between sites and sponsors?
It's a good question, and it's something that I'm very cognizant of, even the aforementioned concept or platform of, say, LinkedIn. There's some things that maybe it's either to get response or to get views or clicks. It's just like any social media thing. Interactions, when not handled, leveraging what we talked about earlier on this podcast, as far as putting others first and being more of like a putting my foot down, or I'm putting my fist down, and this site's not going to take advantage of me, or this sponsor's not going to take advantage of me. There's some legitimate frustration, genuine frustration. And if one looked at case studies of the certain scenarios that have happened, late payments, what contributes towards a negative interaction or a negative viewpoint, and companies and their contract execution folks thinking that sites are just becoming more savvy with their budgets and they want to bleed them dry, or vice versa, a site saying, well, this sponsor just wants to nickel and dime me and not pay me a fair wage because they want to get this for cheaper. Just having that type of energy and mindset, I really feel like plays into a very negative atmosphere. I would rather acknowledge reality, be mature and empathetic. Carrying in empathy and everything would I think, do all of us a ton of good. The things that are negative are when we lose sight of the other party and start making assumptions or start making definitive statements, and also being very closed-minded with what actually is happening. There's always 2 sides or 3 sides or 4 sides to a story. When sponsors are like, this site doesn't respond to us, or this CRO is not responding, there's always more to the story. And I think making those snap judgments and creating heuristics in one's mind that sponsors are out to get us and not pay us or otherwise, and then vice versa, sites are out to just squeeze us for everything is money. Again, take 5 steps back and remember what it is we're doing. We're in an industry that hopefully is developing medicines that would help sick people get better. When we lose sight and we lose that human capacity for empathy is when things go wrong and can get very ugly very quickly.
On LinkedIn, sometimes people like to ride the whole shock value wave for the likes and the attention. I truly believe that throughout the stages of progress, you're going to have anger, because anger is a result of observation.
And commitment, right? If people didn't care, excuse my French, but they wouldn't get pissed off at this. It would roll right off them like water off a duck's back. It's actually because people care. Part of me engages that with eyes open and ears wide open, because I'm listening to people who have a stake in the game and care.
That's interesting. It's almost like saying, thank you so much for caring about this situation to the point where you can bring it to my attention.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you. This is really good conversation. Let's talk about this more and make it right.
Yeah, I see all sides, or I make a concerted effort to make sure that I'm cognizant to try to see all sides. And for me, I do try to maintain a positive aspect to all things without, again, sounding too too high in the sky or head in the clouds, if you will, like not knowing or not being aware of the true issues of our industry. I want to be an industry thought leader in this space, period. And that means I need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I need to be able to interact and facilitate and think outside the box to address those bad and ugly scenarios. But I also highly respect the notion of people reaching a fever pitch point where it just kind of bubbles out, because to me, that means that they've held tight to this concept of doing the right thing. And they're looking at it going, this is not the right thing. We're not doing this right. This could be better for all parties, inclusive of the patients that need the medicines that we're all trying to work on as we're speaking.
It feels almost like a protective mechanism because you feel like someone is taking something from you that they're not entitled to.
Yeah, it's a very good way of articulating that.
How do you think we can improve relationships between sites and sponsors?
I think it's two ways, and I think it's a two-way street. Again, communication is going to be first and foremost, and sites can create tools and helpful kind of processes that bring to the table effective communication on how a sponsor or CRO can best engage that site. If you have certain processes, make sure they're clear. Send out welcome letters on your own. Like, yeah, thanks for selecting
Good
us,
idea.
but guess what? This is what we need. We need X, Y, and Z in order to do this negotiation or even start it, getting it on our books. Really clear communication from the sites. Honestly, sending expectations to the sponsors. For the sponsors, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, we honestly need to take a concerted effort to reevaluate how our current processes are looking towards the sites and take those into consideration and really communicate clear expectations on our end and be held responsible for it and be held accountable. If we say that we need you to do this and we want FPI and X, Y, and Z, and then something happens and it gets kicked out 3 months, we should let you know that week. We should let you know that day so that you can prioritize accordingly and say, okay, well, my manpower or person power that's dedicated to this getting up in an FPI within a month now changes. You can reallocate resource, which we all know is a really finite thing. You can reallocate resource accordingly. And that's just being respectful of both sides.
Respect. That's another very good strength that we could utilize. Maybe respect for each other as professionals. Sometimes sites are always afraid that sponsors are looking down on them, so to speak. Or maybe sponsors feel as though sites are being disrespectful because they have invested so much into a technology and now they're trusting it to a site and they really don't feel like the sites are respecting that technology as they should as professionals. Maybe an understanding from one side to the other. Once you start talking to them and we really start peeling back the layers, going all the way to the patient, maybe that's something that we could consider.
I love that.
If I were to hand you the microphone and I were to say, what would you like to tell the audience about sponsor and site relationships? What would you tell them?
First and foremost, Dr. Fox, thank you. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for reaching out. I've really grown to appreciate our both working relationship as well as professional friendship. For sites and sponsors, I think that we are definitely at an inflection point on a myriad of topics, whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, or payments, or streamlined negotiation processes. There are topics that I feel like have been on our radars for years that we're starting to see momentum towards. And I would say that the concept of fighting the good fight or partnering together and banding together to kind of continue to move that topic and discussion forward is critical at this juncture. I think communication is going to be absolutely paramount and critical to continuing and seeing these efforts come to fruition between sponsors, sites, and CROs and vendors. If I can summarize it, it's that phraseology of putting the other person or other party before oneself, because that creates a scenario where respect is presented and empathy is engaged in. We are in an industry that is so interdependent and codependent, not codependent in a negative way, codependent in such a way that if there are no medications being developed, sites don't have trials to run. If we don't have sites conducting research and enrolling our patients, we don't have the ability of creating data as sponsors to generate submissions or dossiers. It is such a bidirectionally dependent ecosystem that it warrants continued and sustained process improvement mentality in everything we do, in every process. Anything we're doing, we could be getting better, period. Keeping that top of mind is critical. And just putting the concept in one's mind that you're more important than me. If I walk away from my career and I make individuals' lives better in their workplace and I've made productive, impactful change in a positive direction, I'll be a happy man.
I'm feeling the same way. In many ways, the further I get down this journey, the more selfless I am feeling and becoming. More toward the mission as a whole than to any one single entity. It doesn't matter if you're a site, sponsor, CRO, patient. Many times we as an industry are here to lift our society up.
Yeah.
The sites are truly inspired by your message, and we really appreciate all of the efforts that you do at the sponsor level so that we can advance toward far better research.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central. An excellent conversation. I look forward to sharing this with the audience.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye. David has founded and overseen research sites dedicated to community service and diversity for years. Successful relationships are best if they follow long-term time horizons, and they tend to operate best with an understanding and empathy for your collaborators' needs. Make it easy for the lives of those you work with, and communicate as a relationship, not as an action item. We attract what we are ready for, and being positive, grateful, and sponsor-centric as sites will therefore attract positive, grateful, and site-centric sponsors in the long run. Professional relationships without empathy and adequate communication pathways, combined with our legacy flawed budgets and misunderstanding of actual trial costs, combined with people-pleasing site owners who are sincerely trying their best to serve, creates strife and frustration, and adopting self-introspective reflections to look into and resolve our own internal challenges may prevent our outward and negative projections. If we give respect and sincere concern for the well-being of each other, we will make great strides towards positive and productive professional relationships. Dan has worked for years at many different site levels in regulatory management and now in national and global sponsor leadership roles. The current systems do work to help sick people get better. However, there are opportunities to improve relationships and efficiencies if we become servant leaders, put each other ahead of ourselves, and focus on our mutual and altruistic objectives. To be site-centric, sponsors should proactively prioritize the needs their collaborating sites communicate to optimize relationships and therefore the quality of trials performed. Communication of expectations and processes on both sides are critical for positive relationships, and they foster a community between those dedicated go-to professionals during foxhole moments. And although many ride the attention waves of negativity on social media, selfish ultimatums and sincere observations consequentially lead to close-minded and guarded individuals who lose sight of the others they work with. Angry people care, and if we engage, listen, and learn from their concerns, we would not only communicate transparently throughout the industry, but also generate an environment of trust, respect, and accountability. Both interviewers confirmed communication and empathy are critical to the development and management of successful relationships, and where David focuses on long-term time horizons for continued and holistic positive relationships, Dan looks at our mutual and primary focus, helping patients, the longest run of them all. So, how can we promote positive professional relationships between clinical sites and sponsors to improve efficient collaborations and actively advance our research efforts in the industry? Remarkably, both site and sponsor interviews resonated toward almost identical opinions and solutions. Empathy, communication, and selfless prioritization focus on long-term and healthy relationships by working to meet the needs of your collaborators. Recognize the mutual and noble priorities of our industry. Listen to each other and value opinions and concerns. And communicate clearly, not because you have to, but because you truly care about those you speak to. If we consider and adopt just a fraction of these practices and apply them to our everyday lives, we will discover strengthened relationships, improved productivity, and a revitalized initiative to truly advance medicine for generations to come. Thank you again for tuning in to today's exploration into our industry's relationships. Remember, some of the most valuable parts of our days do not cost money, but rather our attention to the needs of those we work with. Thank you to David and Dan for sharing their voice and opinions today. Thank you to our community voice volunteers, Hadi, Danawi, Nikita, Gandhi, and Mike Surlak for participating in today's introductory skit. Finally, thank you to MedVector, Peterson Research Consulting, and Great Lakes Research Network for helping to make this podcast possible. A reminder, please join our Voice of Change as a participant or as a sponsor at the Save Our Sites Conference, February 2nd, 2024, Tucson, Arizona. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on CRPN Central.